Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. This is a really incredible day because a lot of courage is being shown. And if you've watched my programming for any amount of time, I always say we're lacking courage in this nation. I have one of the most courageous men in all of Canada on with me today, and I'd like you to welcome Rob Hoogland. And Rob, I really appreciate that you're taking time. I also appreciate that you are putting yourself on the line. You have quite a story to tell. Our viewers will know that many people have reported on the story of your child wanting to transition and your fight. So I'm going to let you unfold the whole story, how it happened for you. You tell me from your perspective what has transpired.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start by commending you for your courage as well. I mean, it takes courage to actually interview me. I was on the Frank Vaughn podcast yesterday that came out around sometime in the afternoon, and he's already under fire from lawyers that are trying to have that whole thing shut down. So it takes courage to even talk to me right now. My story started when my daughter was, I would say, in grade 6 and grade 7 is where things really started to change. In grade 6, she was kind of identifying as a tomboy, hanging out with the boys, getting into a bunch of trouble, and so I referred her to the school counselor in her elementary school. Everything seemed to be going just fine with that. And of course, as a parent, when you're trusting the school, they're an institution, you have to trust the school is how you feel as a parent. And I did. I trusted the school system and the school counselors that they were getting things done with my daughter that were of her best interest, so to speak. Well, fast forward to grade 7, and all of a sudden, and when I talk about this part of the story, it's confusing in the sense that I didn't know what was going on myself. So I kind of overlap what I know now from affidavits that came out in court and relay it back to what was really going on back then. If that makes sense to the people listening to this, because at the time, and this is important to point out, is I was a parent like every other parent. We're not supposed to know what's going on. And like every other parent, I did not know what was going on in the school system at that time. I'm looking at a child who is, kind of playing different roles, and, tomboy, and then maybe lesbian. I mean, we don't know, right? And you know what? I'm entertaining the idea and thinking, okay, well, these are phases like any other thing that a child wants. Like when children go through, these phases in their life, and, they rebel, they act out, they're trying to find their place in this world, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I thought, nothing unusual here. Well, fast forward to grade 7, as I was alluding to a minute ago, and when she graduates from grade 7, I discover, unbeknownst to me, that she has changed her female name to a male name. It comes out later in court affidavits that it was the school counselor who did this. I was under the impression that it was maybe a choice that maybe she had made, or possibly...
How did you find out? How did you find out that she had changed her name?
She finally had the courage to tell me because she knew I was going to eventually see that yearbook. And so, but she didn't tell me how it had happened. She just kind of said, oh, by the way, Dad, I'm going by this name. And I remember phoning the school up, the principal of this elementary school, and saying, how dare you, post a different name? You don't even tell me that this is going on. And I guess in a way that was the first time I kind of felt like unbelievable. They're kind of leaving the parents right out of this stuff. But again, I didn't know whether I blamed the school because they were the ones that published the yearbook. But I didn't blame the school at that time for being the push behind that change of name. I didn't know at the time. Like I said, I come to find out later, it was the school counselors that had done this.
Quite the betrayal, Rob. When we're all taught to respect authority, and we think that we're sending our child to a safe place at school, and you have found out that that is not true. Absolutely not true. No, yeah, it's a misconception, and that's one of the things that I try and drive home is that, parents don't know what's going on, but it's not their fault. They're not supposed to know what's going on, and that's a big lesson that I've learned, and I hope people will become educated in this area and understand that, so that they can kind of understand how they can navigate through different things with their children in the school system, and just realize, yeah, you might want to find an independent counselor. You don't want to use the school because the school is following a new protocol under SOGI 123 that is pretty much promoting, pushing, pulling
I call it brainwashing your children into a certain ideology, and these kids are buying into it. It's kind of a cool thing right now. So as my child now done grade 7, yearbook, what can you do, right? My ex-wife then says, well, we found this fantastic counselor, Dr. Wallace Wong. He's objective, independent. He is the expert resource on all matters dealing with this kind of stuff. And at that time, I wasn't familiar with terms like gender dysphoria and all these other things that I know now. But I'm thinking, okay, I know my daughter has issues. She's a typical child. She isolates, she's awkward, she's depressed at times. And these are just typical child issues. I figured, oh, great, I've got this fantastic Dr. Wallace Wong. He's going to sort through this, and she's going to get the help that she needs.
Once again, we trust the professionals.
I did. I was naive, but I was not naive on purpose. I was naive because as a parent, you expect you can trust these people, right? It comes out later again in an affidavit. No, Dr. Wallace Wong wasn't some independent, objective psychologist. He was brought on by the high school. The high school recommended this fellow. Again, it blindsided. I didn't know it at the time. So anyway, so he does this assessment while she's 13 and it finishes when she's 14. And I actually end up meeting up with him at one point, and I'm explaining to him, I said, no, I've known my child. I love my child. I've had my child since birth. I see her every day. This is not, this gender, this transition thing that you're talking about is crazy, because he was kind of assessing and I was kind of saying, well, of course, this isn't what's going on. I said, please, she suffers from certain other mental health issues, but this is not it. This is not the solution. And I assume that he, in his assessment, would come out at the end of it all and say, yes, Rob, you were right, and she's going to get the help that she needs. Instead, what happens is he comes out at the end with his assessment and says she is a prime candidate for cross-sex hormones and refers her to BC Children's Hospital. And the more bizarre part is my daughter, on a couple of occasions, had crushes on male teachers, which is typical with students. I've known kids when I went to elementary and high school that kind of developed a crush with their teacher, and this was a male teacher. He decides that, well, okay, yeah, how am I going to explain that one away? Well, no, your daughter is a boy, but a gay boy, and that explains it all away. Like, absolute insanity, lunacy part of these people.
So to understand, your daughter actually kind of had a, who hasn't had a crush on their teacher, kind of admired him, and he's a male teacher. She's a girl. This all is part of growing up.
That's exactly it. And it tells me that she's attracted to males.
Wow.
Right? But of course, Dr. Wong explains it away because he's got to find some kind of magical bullet.
Well, he has all the credentials, apparently.
We don't know. But anyways, so again, stuff I find out later in affidavits that this Dr. Wallace Wong is associated again with the school system. But again, I'm frustrated with the whole thing, but I'm kind of saying, okay, maybe this is going to help my daughter just to let her, kind of engage and play the role. And of course, the school decided they would accommodate her. She was going to go by this new name in the high school and special bathroom privileges and all the other stuff they do in the schools to accommodate someone who thinks that they're not what they are and they're the other sex. So in my case, obviously a girl to a boy. Moving forward, this appointment happens at BC Children's Hospital in August of 2018. And so I did not go. My ex-wife took my daughter there, and I get a call from my ex-wife, and within about 2 hours of this appointment, apparently they were going to start pumping her full of testosterone and cross-sex hormones and Lupron and everything else. And I said to my ex-wife, I said, absolutely no way is this happening. And so she was able to actually stop this.
So to clarify, Rob, could I just ask, that was the very first time that your daughter had gone to a doctor?
Yes. Dr. Brendan Hirsch.
Dr. Brendan Hirsch. Very first time, and within this couple of hours, what he was prepared to move forward with cross-sex hormones beginning to be given to your child?
Yeah, that very
Same day. This alarmed your ex-wife, I guess. So she called you.
she did. Like, even at that time, she wasn't, I mean, she was concerned about this stuff. So she had, you know, the good sense to give me a call. Then I end up with this consent form that both my ex and my child had signed, but to have a look at, because I guess the team at BC Children's Hospital thought, well, we're going to get this guy on board. We will delay it because we want to, you know, work together with the whole family, so to speak. So I'm reading through this form, and it's saying that there is an elevated risk of heart disease, heart attacks, all these different types of cancers. It stunts your growth in its spot, so your body does not go through puberty, which means, you know, your bone density stays where it is at that from the point you start taking these things. On top of that, it says you're going to be sterile. I mean, isn't that alarming enough? And then it goes on to list other things, such as we don't even know what the risk factors are. It's an experiment.
Right.
Right. And then it also was at least brave enough to say, this will not actually change you biologically from a female to a male. We cannot do that. There is no science out there. And it says this in the consent form that will change your DNA or your chromosomes. So it's really just a myth. But what do kids do? They you know, they're going to be attracted to what they want to hear, right? Which is you're going to get all these fantastic things, because it goes on to say your voice will be lowered. You're going to grow facial hair. And I'm talking about daughter or girl to boy, of course. And it tells you that your hairline is going to recede like a male. Or she's going to have hair that looks like mine. She'll never be able to grow it long again, like your hair is. Your genitalia, if you're a boy going to become a girl, your genital just stops growing at that point. You're always going to have this tiny little penis. And with girls, your clitoris expands a bit, so it looks like you have a tiny little penis. But they're both, nothing functions. It doesn't work anymore. It just...
Well, you know, one of the school books that they have for kindergartners is I Am Jazz. And Jazz Jennings is a true life story. And on his reality series, it shows that when they went to the doctor said that he didn't have enough genitalia to actually do a proper, you know, or it's still all, you know, experimental, but to do the operation to make a vagina, because the hormones that Jazz Jennings had been on had so stunted the growth of his penis, you know, and parts. And so I hear what you're saying, Rob. Like, this is an experimental disaster from start to finish. And the doctor on that reality series to Jazz Jennings and his parents said that this is experimental. And they were upset about that.
Yeah, it's 100% experimental. And you're taking kids, you know, who are vulnerable, and, you know, and they're thinking that, that somehow, they're not thinking ahead. They're making decisions based on feelings. That's what children do. They don't make decisions based on playing the tape forward and thinking down the road. Like, kids aren't thinking at that age about having families, having children. Over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, I'm being harassed by a social worker from the clinic, Robin Lilani, who keeps trying to think that if I come down, they'll somehow explain this to me, and as a good father, I'm going to come on board with all this nonsense. And I refuse. And then finally, in December of 2018, I get a certified letter from BC Children's Hospital from Dr. Brendan Hirsch and his team, telling me that under the Infants Act of British Columbia, I no longer have say in my daughter's medical care, anything. I have no access to her records, and that essentially the state is now taking over the medical care of my daughter. And I can just butt out, but I have 2 weeks, if I disagree, to file in court. And I did. I went into provincial court and filed a notice of motion that December, and that's kind of what got the ball rolling in the court system. That
must have taken a lot of guts, Rob. You must have felt that you were up against the giant at that point.
Honestly, I didn't. This is maybe my ignorance in this, to be honest. I know it now, but at the time I thought this is just such common sense that this is wrong, that I thought this is going to get thrown out in about 5 minutes. That's honestly what I thought at the time, believe it or not. It wasn't until I got involved in this I realized what a juggernaut I was up against, but at the time, absolutely not. And luckily, I came across Angelina Ireland, who was connected with Jen Smith, and I gave them that letter from Children's Hospital. And then Jen Smith ended up writing a story in the Post Millennial. And the next thing you know, I've got the National Post involved. And after my second court date in provincial court, which is when they actually, provincial court did what's good for me. They gave me 2 injunctions in a row to get this into the Supreme Court. And the National Post ran a front page story in the middle of January of 2019. And at that time, lawyers for my child and my ex-wife had wanted to go public with names and everything else, because they were used to putting these kids on a pedestal and slamming fathers like me and saying they're just not inclusive, they don't get it, and it's worked. I was actually the one that was able to keep the names out of the paper, but the story obviously was in the paper. And the feedback from that story was all in my favor. People were outraged. And from that point on, in the Supreme Court and everywhere else, there was this big freedom of speech debate, because they kept trying to gag me, and I'll get into that, because obviously we end up in the Supreme Court and we're before Justice Bowden. We bring a petition forward, but we're undermined by Barbara Finley, who is now the sex activist lawyer representing my daughter illegally, because in my in my written agreement with my ex-wife, we also share parenting in terms of legal representation. Children don't sue their own parents.
Right, and I have a clip that I want to show everybody of exactly who Barbara Finley is, so we'll go to that.
So I'm a fat, old, white, cisgender, lesbian lawyer with disabilities, and all of those things about me are important to my work and my place in the world.
The petition that I brought in with, and at that time I had also gotten a lawyer, now Herb Dunton, who I think people are familiar with. His name's been out there for a while. And our petition never even included my daughter as part of the group we were filing against. We went after the school system, Delta. We went after the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, Fraser Health, BC Children's Hospital, Dr. Wallace Wong, Dr. Brendan Hirsch. I mean, anyone that breathed any of this nonsense down my daughter's throat, I was going after. I mean, we were up against about 50 plus lawyers at one point through this case, and still am, because the case is still ongoing in some respects. So we're in front of Bowden, and it's brought under an application where my daughter is suing me, and funny enough, suing my ex-wife. And what people need to understand is that, actually, I'll get into it in a minute, because I think there's, just to clear up the confusion of the fact that this was a state matter. It wasn't because there was a custody issue between me and my ex-wife. And I often have to clear that up, because people say, well, maybe the father didn't have, the 50-50 joint custody to make a call in this case. And the mom had the child all the time, and that's why the dad's not. Absolutely false, not true. I had equal say, joint custody, had my daughter as often as my ex-wife. There's nothing there. So anyway, so Justice Bowden, instead of, he decides he's just going to make a ruling. And what he does is he says he's going to decide what's in the best interest of my child. And so he comes out and says, your child can change her name, doesn't need any parental consent on that. Your child can change her vital statistics in the registry. Your child can go ahead with cross-sex hormones. In fact, start right away. Crazy dad, why did you delay this? I'm a bad boy for, even having delayed this in provincial court. And then on top of that, they say I have to use only the pronouns that she wants. I have to affirm, cheerlead, and if I refuse any of these things, it's now criminal violence, which is usually set aside for parents that beat the crap out of their kids. But apparently calling a she now is equal to beating the crap out of your own kid. I don't get that. So anyways, so I'm under this order. It's absolute insanity. I end up on the Federalist that very evening, and I do an interview with Jeremiah Keenan of the Federalist. And I say, I cannot do this. This is a girl. She's biologically a girl. This is a bunch of, crap. And I'm going to continue to not live in it, because they're creating a delusion now. And I said, I'm not going to live in this delusion. What happens is that Barbara Finley and friends decide they're going to take me in front of another judge, Justice Mazzari, and she in turn weaponizes the Bowden ruling. And I end up with this protection order that says, if I don't do this stuff, I will be thrown in jail without warrant. My only recourse is that I can talk to my 2 lawyers about this, but nobody else. If I were to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you in a coffee shop, and I talked, said, my daughter and you reported me, I would be hucked in jail. And moreover, I'm stuck with my own thoughts. That's the only thing I have left, because the judge said we can't police your thoughts. So, and in fact, they did find me guilty of family violence, and Justice Mazzari actually was almost pleading with the lawyers for my daughter, you know, I'll throw him in jail. I'll throw him in jail. Like, can I do it for? And actually, there was some common sense on their side, because obviously they didn't want to make a martyr out of me. And the lawyers on the other side said, well, we weren't asking for that. So I haven't been in jail yet.
Right. But actually today, what orders still stand? I mean, you are basically saying this far and no further.
Just imagine being a father and you've got a perfectly healthy daughter, nothing wrong with her. And you're told as a father, you can't do anything but cheerlead from the sideline, affirm all this nonsense as you're watching a perfectly healthy body being destroyed. And it's like the worst thing, because it was so preventable.
It's a nightmare, Rob. Any parent listening to this right now, it's a nightmare. You have lived through our worst, scenario of any parent.
Yeah, and and I've been asked, how do you handle this? And my simple answer is, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what these kids, my daughter, are going to be going through when they wake up. I liken it to, it's sort of like saying, okay, I have this is what the schools are doing. This is what these psychologists are doing. And people ask me, what is their agenda? I don't know. I can speculate on that. But the reality of it is that what they're telling these kids is, you don't have to be that sad little girl. You're not happy with that. Well, you can become like an avatar in a video game. And you know how kids, especially these role-playing games, they'll sit there and they'll create their whole image to what they want to be when they're in the video game. They'll pick body type and hairstyle and all. And they're saying to kids, we can do that with you in real. You don't have to be the person you don't want to be. We're going to make you into something else. And so they create this delusion. And these kids, they feel great. I'm suddenly a boy. I'm not that girl anymore. I'm a whole new person. This is me. This is my new identity. But that bubble is going to burst, and it always does, right? And these kids now still have the same issues they had before they were given this completely outrageous line of treatment. And now they have to, on top of that, deal with the fact that they're in this body that is not functioning sexually anymore. They're never going to have a family. I'll never have grandkids from my daughter, thanks to these doctors. And I mean, I can't imagine how they're going to cope, I mean, so I look at my role in this and I say, if I can't handle this, how am I going to expect my daughter to moving forward to be able to handle what she's going to be going through? Like, I can't even imagine. It's going to be so much worse than what I'm going through. You mentioned
Jen Smith, and as a trans-identified man, he talks about how, kids go through things, and goth kids and punk rockers, the rebellious years of a teenager are spent on doing some kind of radical things. Maybe you color your hair in a way that, aggravates your parents. But this has brought it to a whole new level. And I get what you're saying. The state is participating now in the rebellion in some respects, or the fun, or the experimentation of a teenager, leading to lifelong ramifications, being party to it against a parent's wishes, participating in union with a child against parents. And now, who's going to be responsible for this one day, I ask you,
Yeah, this is, call it what it is. It's a state-sponsored child abuse.
Right.
Absolutely. State-sponsored child abuse.
Well, what happened, Rob, when the residential schools began to be shown what had happened? Large payouts are coming. Large payouts, and doctors are going to be held. I'm glad you're naming doctors, because they should be aware that all the children that they are doing this to, because we well know that kids and people who transition can change their mind. And so when that happens, we'll see the chaos that comes from that.
You don't see doctors doing life-saving surgeries hiding their names. So what these guys know what they're doing is child abuse. Otherwise, why aren't they coming out and going on TV and saying, yeah, we're doing this wonderful thing for kids. Why are they hiding?
They're hiding, aren't they? They don't want to be named, you know? Barbara Finley, she has been such an activist. And hasn't she been in court hearings on the other side of your case?
Yeah, I mean, she's an activist on this stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. At what point do lawyers who advocate for something that is life-altering in a juvenile, a young person, can your daughter get a tattoo? Can your daughter get married? Can your daughter drive a car? You know, all of these things are forbidden until certain ages, yet you can transition without your father or mother's consent now.
And this is irreversible stuff. I hope people keep that in mind. I haven't emphasized it enough yet, but this is irreversible. It's not like you can become unsterile, right? Like once you start this, it's your life. It's you can't go back. And you know, and I look at examples of the government parenting kids. You look at the foster care system. Look at what's happening in BC. We have Dr. Wallace Wong on a tape the day after the Bowden ruling from the Vancouver Library saying, well, telling parents and kids, you know what, if you can't get what you want, threaten suicide, and then you'll get what you want every time. You know, and then he goes on to brag about how many kids he has from the foster care system that he's transitioning. The numbers are staggering. And Jen Smith, this is something that he's really pushing to get some real to make some real waves with, because I think he's honest. This is a big story with what's going on with these foster kids. And that's a prime example of the government parenting your child, right? They have no business parenting children. I mean,
absolutely.
This is the destruction of the nuclear family. And like I said, people ask to what end? What is the purpose? You know, I've heard the simple answer is if it doesn't make any sense, it obviously has something to do with money. There's a lot of pharmaceutical companies in. These kids are now going to have to take these drugs for the rest of their life. I mean, there's that component. You know, I say there's a perversion going on. There's people that want to see these kids on the other side of in their opposite dressing rooms at at your local pool. Yeah. I mean, and of course I'm speculating.
Well, that's the next thing coming down, isn't it? The dark side of pedophilia, trying to be normalized, minor sex attracted, turning it around to like it should be taken, out of the books of psychiatric diagnosis. And if you can get a child to be able to consent to this kind of thing, then you can get consent for other behaviors. You see, not to mention the UN putting in all of this gender teaching throughout all the parts of the world, all at the same time. I mean, we're up against not just a Goliath, but like you say, an absolute beast.
Yeah, it's a beast. There's a couple things that I am proud about in what came out in the Court of Appeal, and this is actually going to speak a little bit to even what your comment was about kind of moving forward. Is that what the Court of Appeal in BC did come out and say is, number one, I have the right to dissuade my daughter. And this is going to be important. I want to get into some of this affirmation, conversion therapy, all this stuff in a little bit in just one moment after I explain what happened in the Court of Appeal. So they said I have the right, I still have to use the preferred pronouns, but I do have the right to dissuade my daughter now. It also said that what's in the best interest of the child is strictly on the shoulder of the doctor. And that's key. That is huge. And this is where I'm going to get into some of this affirmation stuff, because what they've been doing is they've been hiding behind the fact that a child, even though they've been coached and pulled along through the school system, and it's not really them saying it, but the minute the child does say it, they can say, well, the child said this, so now we have to affirm this. But really what they're doing is that's conversion therapy. Right? They're supporting the conversion of a child from their natal sex to another one. By sticking with their original sex, you're actually affirming the child. So it's a bunch of nonsense in the language that the left has gotten out there to mess everything up. I talk to so many people that are like, oh, I'm so glad conversion therapy is being banned, until I explain what conversion therapy is. And they go, oh my goodness, we didn't know that.
Here's a whole system cooperating behind your back. The schools, the social workers, the judges, the lawyers, everybody cooperating behind a parent's back, basically, or in spite of a parent, to allow a teenage, fancy, sort of a dream, a teenage sort of experiment, and allowing them to convert and transition into something else. And yet they don't, when a conversion therapy ban comes in, this is the danger, is a beautiful, beautiful child like yours who's struggling. Maybe she needed the right person to talk to, not her parents, not this crazy doctor who's, got only an agenda to transition her, but someone else to talk about what's going on. Why are you feeling this way? To work her through it, to explain the ramifications fully. And if a conversion therapy ban goes through across the nation, nobody will dare, because they won't want the $10,000 fine, they won't want to lose their credentials, and they will not want to go to jail because they tried to help a teenager. You're absolutely right, Rob.
There's no words for it, right? I mean, it's a shame. But I am proud of that coming out of the Court of Appeal, and doctors are on notice now that you have to do what's in the best interest of the child. You can't hide behind the minor anymore.
That's a real victory, Rob.
Yeah, it is. And because I know there's so many doctors across North America and in Europe probably too, and everywhere else, that are losing their jobs by standing up and doing the right thing and being just thrown over the coals for doing it. And it's, and I hope this helps doctors realize, no, my butt is actually on the line if I don't do what's in the real best interest of the child now, and gives them courage, the good doctors. This isn't going to stop, the doctors that have an agenda, I don't think. And we'll see how this works in practice as opposed to in theory. But that is what the PC Court of Appeal did come out and say. So moving forward, obviously, and you alluded to this, and so I'm getting back to this now, is that, who's going to be there for my daughter going forward? Well, it's going to be me. The hospital is not going to be there, right? I mean, this is going to fall on my shoulders now. And so I'm thinking, well, how am I going to handle this? What am I going to do? What can I do? What is my next step? We might be in the Supreme Court of Canada, but that's not going to save my daughter. She's already started all these treatments. Her voice is lowered. She's got facial hair. I wish I had known then what I know now. Because as a parent, there is some room to be able to navigate if you know what's going on. And like I said, they're not telling parents. So I'm here to tell parents because the school.
Thank God.
And there's a reason they've been gagging me all this time. They don't want anyone knowing what's going on.
This is such a serious violation of parental rights, which are actually, in the UN, documents. Parental rights are significant. Our society respects parental rights. This is really an atrocity that's happened to you.
Well, I mean, the way they describe it on the other side is they're simply trying to say that, well, if the father speaks, this is damaging to the child. Even though my child went by her female name, transitioned to this male name, it's not like she's in the closet. I mean, everyone she knows that she's done this. And yet they're trying to, this is their argument, is that, well, the father can't talk because, somehow this is, the rights of the child are now more important than my freedom of speech rights. And right. So they believe they're protecting the child. It's a bunch of nonsense. I mean, what they're doing is they just don't want me to talk about it because because nobody's supposed to know about this stuff. And now I do.
And like you say, it is causing an uprising because anyone who hears about your story, I mean, we've had protests down at the Vancouver Art Gallery on your behalf. Right? You weren't even allowed to attend, but we had protests standing up for you.
Yeah, and my understanding is there's going to be another protest. I believe it's May 2.
May 2nd.
Yeah, May 2nd coming up in Victoria in front of the Parliament buildings there on the same issue again. So people are waking up. And thank goodness, I often say, well, it's one thing to have all the activists talking about it, but the public, I think, needs to see, because they're not seeing parents stand up. And I think that's where this is important, is because parents are typically saying, well, it must not be a big problem. I mean, yeah, sure, the left and the right, they're always fighting. But I think when they see a parent stand up, and I hope more do, they'll realize, oh, there is a problem here, because we're seeing now reaction out of the people that are actually affected, not just people bantering on both sides. So I hope parents do stand up, and if you go back 10 years, I can guarantee you, if you have a child in the public school system, they didn't know anybody that was transitioning. I guarantee if you ask your child now, they probably know 10 kids that are doing this. It's a social contagion now. It's exploding.
And worldwide, it's 4,500% increase in gender clinic referrals worldwide. I'm wondering, Rob, when you were in court, did anybody let the court or the judges know that 82 to 92% of kids who struggle with gender dysphoria will desist from those feelings after puberty, and that it is wise to just give this some time? Did anybody bring that up?
It was brought up all the time.
Wow.
We know the stats. In fact, the numbers actually are as high as 98%. Yeah, no, it was like it fell on deaf ears. It's the most bizarre thing, because it's like I said, when I started this out in provincial court, to me it was just common sense, 5 minutes, done. But I don't know, this determination to mutilate children for whatever agenda has gotten such a foothold that it's like, it's funny because through this court case, there's times where I thought maybe I'm nuts. I mean, when you hang around with loonies and nut jobs, you start to go a little bit nuts yourself. And I keep having to pull back and say, no, these guys are actually really nuts. I'm the normal sane person.
It is. You are. You're the sane person, Rob. Don't stop believing that. Don't start, being assimilated to the Borg of this gender bending nonsense. And because it's just going to take away your drive and your fight for your child, for other people's children. Because at this point, you're fighting for all of Canada. Thank you again. Thank you for talking about this.
Yeah, so I'll end on this. Going forward, and this is forward thinking to all these kids like my daughter, and that's what makes it personal, that are detransitioning. With Angelina Ireland and Jen Smith and myself, we've set up something called the Canis Foundation. And what the Canis Foundation is set up to do is, we're not there really as an activist group, we're more there as a resource group. And so we're looking to parents to educate them. They're the voting bloc right now. They need a place to go. There's enough places for the other side to go. I could Google in 2 seconds and come up with a complete long list of all these people that I can go see to help me deal with my grief of my transitioning child. But there's not a lot of places that are doing what we're going to be doing, which is actually telling parents, being a place where they can kind of come to, and we can be a resource and educate them and say, you're doing the right thing. We can set you up with lawyers and other resources, people you can talk to. And we're also looking ahead, and this is where it's more personal, to all these kids that are detransitioning. And they're gonna come on in mass at some point down the road. Give it 5-10 years.
I agree.
Lawsuits are gonna be through the roof. And we want to be there as a resource, and that's why I've got with Angelina and Jen. And Jen's a great educator on what's going on in the schools with SOGI 123. His voice needs to be heard.
He does, and he talks about the foster care system as well.
Yes, he does, and that's his big thing with what Dr. Wallace Wong was saying. He's got all these clients that come out of the foster care system, and the numbers are staggering. He's got about 1,000 foster care children that he's transitioning. That's what he comes out and says in that interview in the library. And when you start putting the numbers together, it's astonishing when you even take the percentage. If you take every foster care kid, and Dr. Wallace Wong does not have every foster care kid under his control with the Ministry of Children and Family, but even if you were to pretend that number is reflective of the entire amount of children, it's like 7 or 8% of the foster care population is being transitioned. It's staggering, and I'm so glad that Jen just keeps beating that drum.
I appreciate Jen Smith very much as well. I did some great interviews with him in the past, and he's an amazing voice because he understands those feelings of gender dysphoria. One of the amazing things he says is that he's so glad that he didn't have the kinds of activist doctors and activist teachers, because he probably wouldn't have his private parts, anymore, because He was very gender dysphoric, and he is so glad now, as a 54-year-old or whatever he is now guy, that even though he's still trans-identified, he has his parts, because changing your whole being and your chemicals and your body is much worse. Like you're saying, there's a lot of ramifications, and we know that they just had the first detransitioning conference of the people that are going, man, this didn't work for me. I mean, what if that happens for your girl?
Yeah, and that's what I'm preparing for.
An incredible journey that you have been through. At the rally that we did for you, I'd like to put up a clip of what Paul Dirks said, and he was speaking on behalf of another doctor who actually wrote a statement on your behalf and on the behalf of this issue. So I'd like to go to that.
I'm reading out a message from a friend, an endocrinologist by the name of Dr. William Malone. This is his statement that he prepared for this rally. An endocrinologist, listen to him, who has some background on these things. He says, "My name is William Malone. I'm an endocrinologist in practice now for 11 years. I trained at some of the top universities in the United States with some of the world's best endocrinologists. And based on my years of training and years of medical practice, I want to validate something that you already know. And that is, you're right. You're right that we are in the midst of an enormous medical scandal. You're right that vulnerable children are being harmed with experimental medical procedures that have no scientific basis. You're right to be concerned about affirmation therapy. It confuses children and increases the chance that they will choose life-altering hormones and surgery to treat their gender dysphoria. These treatments do not improve the long-term psychological health of people. You're right to be concerned that underlying causes of adolescent onset gender dysphoria are not being investigated. You're right that adolescent girls who have a history of childhood trauma may present with gender dysphoria to avoid sexualization at puberty. You're right that adolescent girls who have autism spectrum conditions may be confused about what it means to be a boy or a girl and present with gender dysphoria. You're right that gender non-conforming children may get confused into thinking that they're the opposite sex. None of these children need hormones or surgery. They need compassion. They need therapeutic counseling to help them build resiliency and to help them build self-acceptance. You're right to suspect that only maladapted or misinformed mental health professionals would recommend affirmation, hormones, and surgery for such children. You're right to be outraged that judges, courts, and governments are defying logic and medical evidence and preventing parents from seeking proper treatment for their children and controlling speech. There are many like me in the medical field who are alarmed at what's occurring. You are not alone. You are on the right path. Continue speaking up. Continue spreading the word. The stakes could not possibly be higher. That's from Dr. Will Malone, an endocrinologist out of the United States. Thank you, Dr. Malone.
Yes, Dr. Malone. Thank you, Paul.
So you see, Rob, you're not alone. And we stand with you. And we do not want you to feel alone. And we don't want your child to feel alone. And we're all taken back by this, but I appreciate that sometimes there has to be a forerunner who's willing to fight. And you're that guy, Rob. Like, we called you Clark Kent for a while, right? Because we think you're like Superman.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we appreciate it.
Back with the National Post when this first began. Yeah.
Yeah. Clark Kent, because it takes a lot to stand for this. Would you say basically you've lost? You've lost at every turn to try to make this better. You've lost.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've completely lost. I mean, I did bring up that one thing that I'm pretty proud of that came out of the Court of Appeal. These doctors are now accountable, but you know, in a personal sense, yeah, I guess you could say that I lost because I wasn't able to prevent my daughter from receiving cross-sex hormones, and her life is irreversibly changed forever. Yes, I mean, and that's something that I have to accept, I guess. You know, we don't have to accept what they've done. I just have to accept the reality that it has been done, and now where do we move forward? And that's, I guess, where the Canis Foundation is my interest in helping to set that up is. And at this point, you know, I just hope other parents don't have to go through this, and there's two ways they don't. One way is to start standing up, speaking up, and let's get some people elected that are going to do something about it. You know, and the other way to do it is just to be educated, understand what's going on, and know how to navigate the system so that your child doesn't find themselves sliding into these cracks where these, you know, sex activist, quote unquote, counselors are coming in and taking advantage of your child.
Absolutely. And you mentioned elected officials. I just want to say that, you know, one of the things that I'm the very most proud of with Maxime Bernier is that he defended, he knew of your situation, and he was alarmed by it, and he spoke up about it. And in fact, I was able to present a couple of statements, and on his stand against cultural descent into chaos, he is a common sense politician, and he is the only one that I know of, Rob, the only one who dared to speak publicly about your situation and in defense of your situation.
I have a message. I was just speaking with People's Party leader Maxime Bernier about what we're doing here today. And Max says he will fight for you, all Canadians. And yes, those with the courage to hold conservative convictions will receive the diligence and strong support of the PPC. We stand for all Canadians. Just as when Max fought against M103, the Islamophobia motion, and the Compelled Speech Gender Bill C-16, such legislation and government action flies directly in the face of Canadian freedom. And as he has said many times, Maxime Bernier will not pander to small interest groups who seek special privilege and protection under the law at the expense of 37 million free Canadians. We all matter. The PPC will do nothing for these interest groups, but will proudly represent our charter freedoms from coast to coast to coast.
Truthfully, the silent majority, this is a winning issue. Like, I don't understand why everyone's turning a blind eye to it as if it doesn't exist, or they don't want to touch it, talk about it. These are kids. Like, why are we all turning a blind eye to state-sanctioned child abuse? It makes no sense. I'm speechless on this when it comes to that.
I totally agree with you. I think that there's so many, and it's really the silent majority, because is it political correctness? Is it fear? A lack of courage? Whatever it is, people are stuck like deer in the headlights to be able to, you know, come forward and vocally stand up for what's right. Meanwhile, our children are being indoctrinated from kindergarten or before, okay? It's in preschool now. And everybody's just like, oh my gosh, I hope they don't tell my kids that, but you don't even know if you want to say anything to the teacher. Please don't teach any of this, you know, gender stuff. Like, everyone is so afraid, Rob, and you literally got thrown into the deep end of a pool on this issue.
To me, fear is not an excuse. You know, I'm driven because I have a horse in the race, obviously, my daughter, and my daughter is more important than any of this nonsense. So, you know, and they're going to go after me for these interviews, you know, and that's why at the beginning I said I even admire your courage in interviewing me, because that's courage, because they're going to go after you.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I've already heard that Barbara Finley has basically been sending out letters asking people who do any interviews with you to take it down. And we're all talking, and we want to stand. And we're tired. This is cultural Marxism. It is a dictatorship. And I did a little speech at that rally for you. And this is only 1:30. This represents how we all feel on this issue. Take a look.
In the Bible, there were 3 Hebrew boys. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there had been an idol set up in the land. And they were told to bow or face the furnace. And they said, Your Majesty, we know that God can rescue us from this furnace. But even if He does not, we will not bow. And so we choose today. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for you. And we will not bow. And if it means going to jail, I don't care. I've done prison ministry. I like the women in jail. We had good Bible studies. I will come out with a better education. Hopefully I'll be a lawyer, and then after that, I will use all of my skill to stand for the freedom that Canada is all about. I urge you to stand. I urge you to fight. I urge you to speak. And I also urge you to love those who feel differently than you do. We are called to love, but we are called to stand. And stand with me as we say, we will not bow.
Well, coming out of that, Rob, I just want you to know that we will not bow, and we value that you will not bow, and that you are holding strong. And whatever this battle looks like ahead, we're going to stand with you and with your family. And I pray that there is a resolving in your daughter's life, and that something great comes out of this, something nation-changing. I pray that your courage changes something for the rest, because there's more kids coming up that are being influenced and being victimized through our societal infrastructure, and it's not okay.
No, it's not okay. And no, we can't bow. You're bang on. It's time for pushback. You know, we've been doing things a certain way for a long time, but it's time to maybe change things up a little bit. I don't know, but it's time for pushback. Has happened now. We're moving into pedophilia, and you know, eventually we're going to have a parent sitting on in that courtroom who's trying to argue why it was wrong for this 55-year-old man to, you know, have sex with his 12-year-old daughter, and he's going to be gagged as well.
Absolutely. And Rob, I know you find this as well, that members of the LGBTQ are not on board with this whole thing that's happening with kids.
No, they're not, and I understand it. I consider myself, it's funny because I have a daughter who's doing this, but I'm still an outsider. And I understand when those people speak up, and Jen is one of them, Jen Smith, how they get persecuted because they feel, somehow they're being a traitor to their cause. And yet, no, these are good people as well that are also understand you don't do this to kids, right?
Exactly.
So I appreciate the courage even out of the LGB community that, you know, is willing to step up, stand up as well. Every religion, you name it. This is a mainstream thing that I think everyone can agree on. We don't abuse children.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rob, for your time. Thank you for what you're doing. And we will be following this very closely.
All right. And thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Rob. If you like the content that you see here today, would you consider supporting it? It's 100% viewer supported. You don't get paid to do this because our world has changed so dramatically that speaking like this is an act of courage. Would you support that initiative? Thank you.